Hello and welcome to the first of the field agronomy update for the week of June 8th, 2015. In this week's update, we're going to be talking about how to accurately stage crop sizing here as we're starting to move into phases of development where we need to be able to identify those things properly and making correct herbicide applications. So every year when we get to the middle of June, there's always a period of time where we get a lot of phone calls and questions on what stage is my corn at. People will say it's so many leaves or it's so high, and oftentimes with herbicide applications, the things we really need to be looking for is the actual collar stage of the crop. So we wanted to give a quick reminder. It's somewhat elementary, but we get questions every year, so we thought it was pertinent. Wanted to give a reminder on how to properly size or stage a corn plant here. So what we do is we look at when the corn's roughly in the V5 or V6 stage or smaller, it hasn't lost or sloughed off its leaves yet. So you can usually still find the first true rounded leaf right here that I've got in my thumb, and so it's a more of a rounded appearance versus a pointed tip. So this would be the first leaf. So this is V1, V2, V3, V4, V5, and the collar is out on this last leaf. When we say collar, we're talking about the leaf having an open collar wrapped around with open side on the stalk there. Right here, this would be open on this side, so this is a V6 corn plant. One of the things that we've had questions on in regards to this year is a lot of herbicide labels talk about V8 or 30 inches, for example, on glyphosate spraying being safe. Well, this corn plant is roughly only about 13 to 14 inches tall and is already a V6 corn plant. So the staging, it's much more important to be able to accurately identify collars and know where you're at versus going off of plant height, especially in a year when we've had a lot of cold stress that causes the plants and the inner nodes to be tighter together. So when you're out staging, always take the time to try to figure out how many leaves and how many collars you have to make sure that you're not applying things off label. This field right now is right at the max label for certain products already, like Caprino, which has a V6 label, but this would still be safe for things like Halix, glyphosate, impact status, Lotus, things of that nature. So that's just a little bit about how to properly stage a corn plant at this time of the year. Another question that we've had a fair amount of calls on, especially late last week and early this week, was the unevenness of corn that we're seeing out in the field. We've got some fields like this one look really, really nice and even, but then there's certain fields that have yellow streaks or blotches, or areas that just don't make a lot of sense where the corn doesn't look as good. And the reason we're seeing that is likely due to environmental stresses or things around compaction, things that are restricting root growth in a lot of those places. Because what's happened is, once we get to the V3, V4 stage, the corn plant starts to transition over from the seminal root system here that develops off of the kernel, and then switches over to the nodal root system. And when that happens, if you have any type of restrictions in the ground that these roots can't get out and explore and find nutrients and water, you tend to see separation where there's differences specifically in soil density where root exploration can't happen. So what we would suggest is before coming to conclusions just driving by the field and what your problem is, get out and do some digging and these spots that are yellow and try to see is it a seedling depth issue, is it a sidewall compaction issue, is it a wheel track issue, was that area of the field wet when you worked it? Those are just some of the things to take a look at to try to determine what the cause is for some of those yellow areas. The good news is that with some heat and moisture and a little bit of patience, a lot of these spots will eventually get through it and get the root system off and running, and we should see things turn around here relatively shortly. So we moved over to a soybean field to kind of go through the same exercise as far as staging soybean plants accurately at this stage in the game. As you can see here, this dug a plant up here so you can see the root system, and you can see the cotyledons that came out first, then the unifoliate leaves. And then as we start to stage now with soybeans, we give the V stages based off of how many trifoliate leaves. So when we say trifoliate, we're looking at specifically a petiole that comes off that has 3 leaves connected to it. And that always confuses people a little bit sometimes this point in the year, but this is considered one trifoliate leaf here. So when we look at this bean plant, we've got 1, 2, 3. So this is a V3 soybean plant, and we've got a couple more starting to come. So this thing's actually off to the races pretty well. So for beans that were planted in the first week of May, this is kind of a common stage right now, V3 to maybe pushing V4 and some really good looking beans. It becomes important to start staging this stuff now, especially with some of the herbicide applications people are considering making. There's several products like Zidua and Anthem, residual products with peroxysulfone in them, that we would have to be sensitive because we were pretty much at the upper limit as far as the labeled application for those type of products now. The other thing I wanted to make a comment on with beans here is, when you're out evaluating your bean stands, is take a look at the nodulation here specifically on the main taproot. V2 to V3 is when nodulation really starts to occur, and the soybean plants form the symbiotic relationship with the rhizobia bacteria, either that you inoculated on your beans or that are in the soil. And the benefits of inoculating are, like on this plant here, if Anna can zoom in closely here, is you want to see nodules forming right around the crown of the root as much as possible. You want to see a really dense mass of nodules there to be actively fixing nitrogen for you. You should start to see that at this point in the game of development, and that's really important. If your field is yellow looking or kind of pale, likely at this stage in the game it just hasn't quite gotten its nodules up to speed to start fixing nitrogen for the plant. So that's a little bit about staging soybeans and what's going on at this point in the game with soybean development.